მისდევაზე ესეთი ინტერესი არის. ჩვენი დღევანდელი დისკუსია გამგებლებულია მით, რომ საქართველოს ძალიან მალე, როგორც 2027 ივნის, ხელს აწერს ასოცირების შეთანხმებას ევროკავშირთან. ჩვენ ვფიქრობთ, რომ საინტერესო იქნებოდა ამ თემის განხილვა რუსეთთან ურთიერთობების ჭრილში, რისთვისაც მოვაწვევთ ჩვენი დღევანდელი სტუმრები რუსეთიდან, შვედეთიდან, საქართველოს წარმომადგენლები, რა თქმა უნდა. ჩვენ შორის სტუმრებს უფრო დაწინებით წარადგენს ჩვენი დღევანდელი მოდერატორი ბატონი თენგიზ ხალაძე, გეოპოლიტიკური კვლევების საერთაშორისო ცენტრის ხელმძღვანელი. მე ვფიქრობ, რომ თემა ძალზე აქტუალურია უკრაინის მოვლენების გათვალისწინებით და ძალიან საინტერესო იქნება ჩვენ დღევანდელი სტუმრების პერსპექტივა მიმდინარე მოვლენებზე და შესაძლო შედეგებზე, შესაძლო გავლენაზე საქართველოზე, რას უნდა ველოდოთ ასოცირების შეთანხმების ხელმოწერამდე, წლის შემდეგ, რა გავლენას მოახდენს ეს ურთიერთობაზე საქართველოს და ევროკავშირის შორის, საქართველოს და რუსეთის შორის, მთლიანად რა სურათი დაიხატება, ძალიან მაინტერესებს მე თვითონაც დღევანდელი დისკუსიის შედეგად. მე მოგებულს გადაცემ ბატონ თენგიზ, რომელიც მოგებულს ორედი სიტყვაცა ჩვენი სტუმრების შესახებ. დიდი მადლობა. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. First of all, express gratitude to our host. Today we have a really European day in the House of Europe, because this morning we had an opportunity to Mr. Campaign, and now we have discussion about future of Georgia. We have discussion about association agreement, and you all know that already been decided that 27th of June, Georgia will sign association agreement. So, and today we will discuss about what to expect, what is our expectation, what is European expectation, how we association agreement may affect on our relations, Russia's attitude toward Georgia, and Russia's view, of course, we will touch Ukrainian case. So we have a lot of things to discuss, and today we have three distinguished speakers. Mr. Giorgi Badridze, really very skillful Georgian diplomat, our former ambassador to Ukraine, and Giorgi is senior fellow of the Georgian Foundation for International and Strategic Studies. Ambassador Peter Semneby, head of the mission embassy of Sweden in Kabul, and Peter is former EU special representative for the South Caucasus, and I can say that Peter is a person who was deeply engaged in the Georgian reality, not only Georgia and the South Caucasus, and he knows all issues, internal and external, and the conflict resolution issues, and so on, so on. And Mr. Sergey, head of the Department of Strategic Assessment of the Center for Situation Analysis, Russian Academy of Science. And Sergey in 2006-2013, he worked at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Russian Academy of Science. And he holds PhD in political science. His research is focused on the foreign and security policy of the EU and EU relations with Russia and the US, Russian foreign policy in the Euro-Atlantic area. So we have a free presentation. I'd like to ask you all make presentation now for 15 minutes. After presentations, you can ask each other some questions, and I need speakers, and after this we will open a Q&A session. So I will start with my friend Giorgi. Today, President of European Council, that Georgia will sign a association agreement in 27th of June, and really it is essential decision for our country, for our country's further modernization, prosperity and further integration in the European family. And I think nowadays association agreement is a more discussed issue in Georgia. So what do you expect from the EU and what do you expect from Russia? And will the signing of the association agreement by Georgia change Russia's or EU policies toward Georgia? Georgi, please.
Thank you. Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank the Europe House Georgia and International Center for Geographical Studies for organizing this event. And I would like to greet my fellow presenters, Ambassador Semneby and Utkin. My presentation is called Georgia's European Choice, and what I'm going to discuss is basically a long way that Georgia took to this day and the reasons why we are headed towards Europe. But in the beginning, I will very briefly describe what we are talking about for those who are not necessarily aware in depth of the details of the association agreement and the free trade agreement area. Implementation of a deep and comprehensive free trade area, DCFTA, between the EU and Georgia after the planned signature in June may create and will create more attractive conditions for European exports and investments in Georgia, and for its part, Georgia will improve its economic cooperation with the European countries and strengthen our economy. The EU has been deepening economic ties with Georgia for a number of years, but especially since 2003, and particularly since the accession of the Eastern European countries to the European Union 10 years ago. As an initial step, Georgia was granted GSP Plus to support our economic cooperation and growth. And later, in 2010, we started discussing the association agreement, and then in 2012, deepened comprehensive free trade area with the European Union, which was concluded last year, and with all luck, we'll be signing it on the 27th of June this year. So the impact, the expected impact of the DCFTA is to basically upgrade the EU-Georgia economic ties by facilitating trade and investment. It's a highly technical agreement, and obviously I'm not going to go into the boring details of it, but the basic idea is on part of the European Union to support stability, democracy, and economic growth in the eastern frontiers of the Union. The overall DCFTA could increase Georgia's exports to the European countries by 12% and imports by 7.5%, according to the estimates made by the EU itself, as well as propel Georgia's GDP by more than 4% in about 5-10 years' time. But let me go back to the choice itself, and this will bring me back at least by 2,000 years. Don't be frightened, I'm not going to tell you the entire history of Georgia, but if I did, it would be a story why Georgia the nation thinks of itself as a European nation, and why we believe that what we're doing today is just a return to our home, where we belong. Georgia's geopolitical location has been both a blessing and a curse. Geography has predetermined our tricky predicament of being located right in between the major Eastern and Western civilizations and the superpowers of the ancient world. The fact that Georgia has survived as a nation, living mostly in the same place, speaking the same quirky, strange language, using the same unique alphabet, and preserving the good and not so good traditions that we have is by itself an achievement. And it is more so if you consider where it has been happening. Not many nations are still around with whom Georgia started its journey in the ancient history. And we did so in the most turbulent crossroads, while many stronger and larger nations have vanished in more stable regions. So, for centuries our ancestors had to carefully balance, or were often choose sides between the Eastern and Western superpowers all the time. But most of the time we stood in the Western camp. The most vivid manifestation of this probably is the statue of the Georgian king Archbishop the Good, erected by Antonius Pius, the Roman emperor, in 157 AD. Archbishop, the king of Iberia, the country at the time that dominated most of the South Caucasus and more, visited Rome at a state visit at the invitation of the Roman emperor as an ally. Adoption of Christianity in the early 300s firmly anchored Georgia in the Western world. And even the most brutal wars against our country, first by Zoroastrian and later Muslim neighbors, could not turn us from the Western orientation. When we were strong, we fought together with the European allies, and when under the waves of invasions, and particularly when Georgia became physically cut off from the West, we sought to reunite with the Christian world. I can go on and give you more evidence, but the bottom line is that Georgia has been a part of the Western civilization for most of her history. And even at times when we had lost physical connection for several hundred years, we preserved our essentially European identity. In the late 18th century, when a Christian Russia started reaching the Caucasus region, we tried to form an alliance. But unfortunately, it ended in the greatest fiasco in our history. In the early 19th century, for the first time in our history, we lost all attributes of statehood. Instead of alliance, we received an annexation. And even the Orthodox Church was not spared. The world's one of the oldest apostolic autocephalous Christian church that had survived Persian, Mongol, Arab invasions. It was abolished altogether. A century later, when the Russian Empire collapsed, Georgia grabbed the opportunity to restore its independence with two hands. The state that we built was a truly European democracy, with a constitution way ahead of its time. The leaders of the European social democracy viewed us as a beacon of social democracy at the time, like later, almost 90 years later, well, nearly 100 years later, European and American conservatives viewed Georgia as a beacon. Georgia was visited by a great, big delegation of the European Social Democrats led by Ramsay MacDonald in 1919, the future Prime Minister of Britain. But let us imagine that we forgot for a second the long history of Georgia, which would give us a clear answer where the Georgian people stand in their choice between the European and other civilizations. Let's forget Georgia's most recent reincarnation as a European democracy in 1918 and 1921. And let's imagine that we faced our choice of the state, government, and socio-economic system for the first time just now. Let's even forget that Russia has been actively undermining our independence since the day one and has waged several wars that killed thousands of Georgians and destroyed large parts of our country. What are the options? What do the main alternatives, European Union and Russia, or her Eurasian Union, represent? And essentially, what do they offer us? In short, on the one hand, there is a union of the European democracies which managed to build a political and economic structure that has ensured the longest period of peace and stability on the European continent, and the world's most attractive socio-economic system. What does the EU offer us? Well, that's called Eastern Partnership, that was designed to promote stability and economic development on their eastern frontiers. Europeans think stability and prosperity of their neighbors is good for them, and it's worth investing in. The association agreement and DCFTA is an instrument to achieve this. Let's have a look at Russia, which I have to say, and this is particularly directed at our Russian representative, I say this without any pleasure whatsoever, because I grew up in a family that was largely speaking Russian. I am devoted lover of Russian culture, and I can claim I'm an expert in Russian literature and music and many other things. My father spent most of his scientific life with his Russian colleagues. His master's and PhD and doctoral degree come from MGU. My great-grandfather, a well-known Georgian doctor also called Giorgi Badridze, was an MGU graduate. My another great-grandfather was a St. Petersburg University graduate, both perished in 1937. So what I'm going to say does not give me any pleasure whatsoever, but I will describe how things look to me, and then I would be happy, I would be looking forward to hear Dr. Utkin's perspective of what he thinks the reality is. So it is a subjective impression of one Georgian gentleman. So, Russia has been liberated from the shackles of the communist economic system for more than 2 decades. So anyone would expect Russia to be, by now, the world's richest country, because Russia has everything to be the richest country, quite literally. Is it? Of course, there is no comparison with the miserable 90s, but was not the economic growth that we have witnessed in the last 12 or so years largely tied with the oil and gas revenues? In terms of the political system, Russia today is an increasingly authoritarian country. It employs the philosophy of government that stresses the primacy and glory of the state, unquestioning obedience to its leader, subordination of the individual will to the state's authority, and harsh suppression of dissent. Martial virtues are celebrated in the bare chest form. Liberal and democratic values are disparaged. The system is based on protection of the interests of the oligarchic elites. The leaders of the government are portrayed to the public as embodiments of their strength and resolve necessary to rescue the nation from the political and economic chaos. Nationalists, xenophobia, and homophobia are encouraged by the government. And what I just described is actually a Merriam-Webster or Oxford Dictionary description of fascism, quite literally. So, Russia has the neighborhood policy as well. So what do they offer us? And the best example, I think, is not Georgia, but Ukraine and Belarus. Ukraine, not today, but a few months back, when pro-Russian, obedient leader of Ukraine just attempted to sign the very same association agreement and DCFTA that we are discussing today. And what happened? he was not allowed to do this. And this, in my view, reveals what Russia has in store for her neighbors. In my view, this means that Russia wants to be surrounded by poor, unstable, corrupt countries that are basically failed state and that Europe will never have interest into. Their only destiny will be to reunite with whatever new name of the Soviet Union is. This is to put in a simple and short way. Georgia could, and I'm sure will be one day, Russia's good neighbor, and that's when Russia becomes a normal state. We could even be allies. But for now, for the reasons that I described, Georgia sticks with its European choice, not only because it offers better goodies and better terms, but because this choice has been made by many generations of Georgians long before us. Like I said, I'm looking for the future in which Georgia and Russia can be allies in a united great European area. But for the moment, this is where I'm going to end. Thank you.
Thank you for an optimistic final. Thank you for your presentation. Actually, you covered everything, I think. History of Georgia, our choice, Georgia's European identity, geopolitical environment, Georgia-Russia's relation, DCFTA, economic ties, so on, so on. So, I think we'll have more time for discussion of these issues. So, now Peter, Sweden, together with Poland, was initiator of the Eastern Partnership. And today, 5 years later, we have a picture where 3 of 6 Eastern Partnership countries show their strong determination to become closer to the EU. Ukraine has already signed political part of the association agreement, and Georgia and Moldova are ready for signing, including the CFTA. And my question is, what does it mean for EU? How do you see new relations with the association member? And we know what we need from EU. What do you expect from association members? And association agreement, first of all, is the agreement about common values and there's opportunity to build up democracy. It's a successful country. But the young democracies already met very serious security threats and challenges. Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, all 3 have a very complicated problem of their territorial integrity. Will the signing of the association agreement change EU policy or Russian policy, and how the EU can protect the young democracies?
Lots of questions. Well, let me say that the date of the signing is of course going to be important, but things are not going. I think it's on. No, try this.
Yeah, of course the signing is a symbolically important event, but one has to keep in mind that this is one step in a long process that is not that has been going on for ever since the Georgia regained its independence, with various steps that Georgia and the EU have taken towards each other, and it is going to continue after the 27th of June, also with the implementation of the various provisions of the agreement, and possibly further steps in the integration process. And I noticed this morning that President Van Rompuy very explicitly opened up for further steps in this process. What all of this is about are different things really for Georgia and the EU and the European partners, but ultimately the priorities are converging. For a country like Georgia, it's to a large extent about finding security. It's to a large extent about defining its identity after regaining its statehood and finding itself almost alone on a very stormy sea. And it's also about prosperity, not least about prosperity and an environment where the individual citizens of the country are able to prosper. There have been a lot of obstacles on the way. I would not say that these obstacles are out of the way with the signing. There have been ambiguities, different ambiguities on the Georgian side and on the EU side. The EU has been, and is still, ambiguous about what we sometimes call strategic finality of the integration process. Are the Eastern Partnership countries potential members of the European Union, or are they not? There have also been ambiguities about hierarchies of priorities between the Eastern partners on the one hand and the very much larger partner Russia looming in the background. In the case of Georgia, we have seen some ambiguities along the road in terms of whether Georgia, as a newly independent country, is really willing to embark on a new integration process that would mean that it would have to give up some of the sovereignty that it has regained. Should Georgia rather do it alone? Another obstacle, one that I have been very much involved with, relates to the conflicts, and I will come to that in a moment. To what extent the conflicts have impacted on this process, and to what extent they will continue to impact on it, and what we can expect in the future. Another obstacle has been the weakness of the institutions. It is, of course, to be expected that a country that has not been an independent state in modern history finds itself with very weak institutions that are not simply not designed for all the tasks that and expectations that its partners in the European Union and the world outside will have. And finally, another obstacle is the differences in mindsets. And I would say that the difference in mindset is largely one between a postmodern Europe talking about and pursuing shared sovereignty and integration of various kinds versus a modern, in the political science sense of the word mindset of Georgia and the other countries that have recently become independent, where the name of the game is to strengthen institutions and to bring clarity of a kind that does not exist in the postmodern world that the European Union represents. Now about the conflicts. When I left my job as the EU Special Representative in early 2001, I warned that about the danger of refreezing the conflicts, of taking the easy route, the short-term route of apparent stability by ignoring ignoring the underlying causes of the conflicts and pretending that things are better and more stable and more predictable than they are. What we saw already in 2008 was cracks developing under the surface against the background of conflicts that have been frozen for a long period of time. And I think what we are seeing now is basically the same thing happening, but in another theater, not in Georgia, but in Ukraine. These conflicts can only be addressed by fundamentally addressing the relationship that Europe has with Russia. Russia has also, in a way, although it has been very much at the top of the agenda for long periods of time during this period, also been neglected, or at least in the sense of Russia's identity. There has not been enough, I would say, focus in Europe on Russia as a European state. This needs to be acknowledged, and we are seeing in a rather bizarre, absurd way at the moment Russia expressing its vocation as a European state. We were seeing that its interests are primarily in Europe. Its identity is very much tied to the way that relations with its immediate neighbors in Europe develop. It's tragic that these relations have taken the course that they have taken now in Ukraine, but nevertheless it demonstrates that Russia's vocation is a European one, and our strategic and long-term task is to channel this vocation in a way that provides for a stable and friendly relationship with Russia's neighbors, and to ensure that security for all, including Russia in the long term, is not pursued through confrontation, but by combining and pursuing joint interests. The fact that Russia is a European state, I think we can also see. Anybody who's visited Vladivostok will realize that immediately that Vladivostok is not an Asian city. It's fundamentally a European city. It's culturally very much a European city. Russia is culturally very much part of Europe. The member states of the European Union have faced, over the course of the last 20 years, a quite serious contradiction or dilemma in facing the challenge from Russia, which should Europe face up to the Russian challenges, or should one prioritize the avoidance of any kind of cataclysmic confrontation? There has been a kind of cleavage between those on the one hand who have a fear of Russia and see a need to comfort Russia, and those others who see those who fear Russia need to would rather confront Russia, and on the other hand those who fear confrontation with Russia and would rather prefer an accommodation with Russia. This dilemma has not been resolved, and I think as a result of this ambiguity, this has contributed to the crisis that we are seeing today. I mentioned also the identities and mindsets, but I think I will not go into that. I have quite a lot to say here as well, but I think we can take that in the questions and answer session instead. I can also go into the recommendations and observations I made on the conflicts when I started my work, and try to look back at those and see where we are today and what remains to be done on those conflicts.
Truly, we will be very interested to hear your opinion about this. So thank you, Peter. Beautiful presentation, and I'm sure that it provides a lot of questions in our audience. And now, Sergey, we already mentioned Russia. So it looks like Russia painfully reacts on the process of Europeization of post-Soviet countries, so-called Nizhny Zaporozhye, and consider this as a geopolitical tension and confrontation with the West. And it seems to me that Russia tries to develop its own projects like customer union, Russian union. Just 2 days ago, White Prime Minister Sergey made a very tough statement regarding Moldova and said that signing the association agreement will have serious consequences and impact on Russian-Moldova relations. We already have Ukrainian cases, we have occupied territories of Georgia. So what do you think? Where such confrontation can lead all of us? And what do you expect? And how the signing of the association agreement can affect Russia-Georgia, Russia-EU relations, and how Russia consider this? This is a zero-sum game, or can we discuss winning strategy?
Well, thank you. And I will answer your question about confrontation probably throughout all of my presentation, because it's too complicated, too multifaceted. And to start with, I'd like to say that it's a great honor to speak in Tbilisi on the same day and in the same room where Herman Van Rompuy was speaking this morning. And actually, as a policy analyst who deals with the European Union, I do remember how people were harshly criticizing the very nomination of Herman Van Rompuy as the president of the European Council. And today, I think people see that this nomination is vindicated, that it was a very good point to put at this very important position, a man who is able to elaborate compromises. And this is something we should keep in mind when we deal with conflicts, when we deal with confrontation. In my view, confrontation is in nobody's interest. And if we want to avoid confrontation, we need to do a lot behind the closed doors, probably. You should not expect de-escalation in the crisis situation to come out of megaphone diplomacy, when people exchange harsh statements, as those made by Deputy Prime Minister Sergey. And you should work more on other levels, on the levels where you are not seen by the public and you don't work for the public. I still hope that even with the current Russian official policies that you all see, we have quite some opportunities to proceed with this dialogue, substantive dialogue behind the closed doors. and we are still able to find solutions that will help us to avoid further confrontation, although this will be not an easy thing to do. I have also probably to say that as I work in an academic institution that is funded by the Russian state, you might expect that I'm supposed to represent the governmental line here. This is not the case, in spite of what you could hear about the atmosphere of Russia, which is not a welcoming one for different opinions in the public sphere. Still, we keep quite some academic freedom so far. And I will just speak in my personal capacity, and in many respects I regret the Russian official policies that I see today. So it's not necessarily that I cannot explain these policies. If you need an explanation, I can provide an official point of view, I can provide alternative points of view, but in the end, I have an opinion of my own, and this is what I will focus on. I will also say a couple of words on Ukraine, but closer to the end of my presentation. So, the association agreement, something that was demonized by the official Russia, and something that few people actually read. Something that is, in my opinion, actually a step in the right direction. You have a tool that lets you ensure closer cooperation with the European Union, that lets you accommodate your laws, your way of economic activity to the European examples, but it's not a panacea. It's not something that would change completely the way of life in Georgia or in any other country. And this is not the end of the way. It's just the very beginning of what you would have to do if you really want to modernize your country. And I would make a stress on this word modernize, because actually, when we speak about Europe, when we speak about the way European countries live, we quite often mean not exactly the institutional structures. Countries like Switzerland do not participate fully in all the institutional structures of European integration, although they are attached to these structures through some treaties and arrangements. But still, you would never doubt that these countries that do not participate in the EU but still are situated in Europe are somehow less European than the EU member states. So it's not all about institutions, and to a large extent, it's probably precisely about modernization. You think about countries that modernize successfully, and by modernization I don't mean just economic modernization, also political modernization. An ability to develop their political systems in a way that human rights are respected, that a rule of law is established, and these are also parts of modernization. You may not think of modernization as a completed one if you don't have these necessary elements. But still, if you look at the text of the association agreement itself, this first step you can make on this European way, you will find these two big parts. One is political, one is economic. And the economic part is much larger, both as a text and in terms of its meaning. Because in the political part, practically the only thing that can be considered as a step forward is an improved cooperation between the European Union and partner countries in common foreign and security policy. On the one hand, it's important. On the other hand, you don't really need an association agreement to go forward in this field in cooperation with the EU. The European Union has specific agreements with quite a number of countries, including Canada, the United States, on their participation in crisis management that is arranged by the European Union. The same kind of agreement is being discussed, or at least was discussed before the crisis, between Russia and the European Union. So you don't need a comprehensive agreement like the association agreement to proceed with this. So the political part is practically just a sign, a message that you are ready to go this European way. The important part, the practically important part, is the DCFTA. And this free trade agreement is sometimes, again, considered as a panacea, as something that will change completely your economy. Changes will come gradually as you will adopt the laws that constitute the acquis communautaire of the European Union. You will see changes in how your business is developing, but this will not bring you to a completely different level of quality of life. If you don't do anything and you just sit and wait until the association agreement gives some certain effect. The basic part of the free trade area is, of course, the elimination of trade barriers. And on this, I would like to spend a couple of minutes just to show to you a number of slides. Don't focus on them too much. It's just because you know, numbers and figures are a bit complicated when you just hear them, and it's better to see them as well. So I just wanted to show to you that actually, if you think that everything in trade in the European countries, trade activities is determined by free trade areas, by agreements between, for example, the European Union and partner countries. This is not exactly the case. There are other factors which are no less important and which you should take into consideration. I just took a number of examples. The countries that, some of them at least, can be compared with Georgia in terms of demographic rate and the size. Look at Croatia, which has just joined the European Union. But here we have the statistics from the time when it was still in process of joining the EU. And you see that on the one hand, yes, it has a great presence of the European Union in its trade. But is it a function of having some specific legislative arrangements, some specific international agreements with the EU, or the economic weight of the EU, which cannot be ignored, which is just too powerful and too close not to trade with it? Because if you look at other countries which are in the top of activities, they don't have a free trade area or something with either the European Union or Croatia, but they are still a successful trade partners cooperation. Some of them, like Bosnia and Herzegovina, are there because of the geographic proximity, of course, and historical ties. Some of them because they are just big economic powers, like China. You don't necessarily need some specific trade agreement with China to have China as one of your major trade partners. It's just because what China is that it becomes one of the major trade partners for many countries, including European countries. And you have a similar picture if you look at different countries like Serbia, which is sort of further away from from becoming a member state of the European Union. And again, it's not yet that close as Croatia, or it was not that close as Croatia in 2012 to join in the EU, but still you have pretty much the same numbers for trade with the EU just because of the economic weight of the EU. And again, you have Bosnia and Herzegovina represented, you have Russia represented, you have China represented. So it's not all about some sort of international agreements that you conclude. For Georgia, again, you may say a lot of nice words about your European devotion, but you see that your trade is heavily influenced by where you are, by the fact that you are in this region and you trade first and foremost with the countries which are in this region. Of course, you cannot ignore the economic weight of the EU, but you also cannot ignore the trade partners which are just next to your doorstep. And this will also be the case after the association agreement. When you sign it, when you implement it, when you have the DCFTA with the EU, you will still have countries to your countries next to your doorstep, which will be among your preferable trade partners, and they will not disappear because you sign this or that agreement. I would like to draw another example, the example of Belarus, which has pretty bad relations with the European Union on the official level. The EU is of very low opinion of Belarusian policies and Belarusian president. But still, if you look at the figures, you see that Belarus has quite some trade with the EU. It has quite some significant presence of China in its trade. So it's not completely about the agreements you conclude. It's not completely about this story about the customs union, about the association with the EU. There are also different factors you have to take into account. If you look at one of so to say, prosperous states inside the European Union, you will again see that geography still matters. That if you take Denmark, again, a state which is about the size of Georgia in demographic terms, then again you see that it trades mostly with countries which are geographically close with, or with big economic powers like China. So if you even get into the EU and you are completely part of this common space, you still have geography influencing your trade, you still have other factors that are important. And I can continue this way, just save some time, to say that actually if you look at the data of the World Trade Organization, you will see that many countries are going the way of making their tariffs ever lower, even if we don't talk about some preferential arrangements, for example, between the EU and partner countries, but about the regime of the most favored nation. So practically for any country in the world, this works. You may trade with other countries, and quite a number of countries, including the United States, including Canada, including Georgia, including Armenia so far. They choose to have low customs tariffs, and this helps them to be more competitive on the international market. So in the end, just to show you the dynamics, a chart which is not made by me, it's just a classic chart that shows that the level of tariffs in the world, customs tariffs, is going down all the time, and since 1947, in the beginning of this chart, till 2007 in this chart, you see that it was a continuing decrease of tariffs, and this will continue. It's just the way the globalized world economy works. So this was just to show that actually, if you look at the association agreement from the economic point of view, it's logical. It's a logical continuation of the liberalization of the world economy that is going, but it's not something absolutely extraordinary. It's not something that puts you in a much better position than other countries of the world. And I just skip the data for Russia, but if you look closer at Russian trade partners, you will find out again that Russian trade is not influenced absolutely by the customs union, future Eurasian Union arrangements. You see that Russia actually has the biggest share of its trade with the European Union. We have about 50% of our trade turnover with the European Union. So if you think that Russian economic policies are all about the customs union, the Eurasian Union, it's just wrong. It's a kind of arrangement that lets Russia cooperate closer with its immediate neighbors, with Belarus and Kazakhstan, but this is not the main thing happening in the Russian trade, and Russia still continues to be one of the important partners for the European Union, and the European Union continues to be a very important partner for Russia in spite of the political difficulties we have. And the last minute probably that I have for my presentation, I will spend on saying just a couple of words on this crisis situation that we have. Of course, we are losing quite some capital that we created in cooperation between the EU and Russia. But mainly this is political capital. And you have to keep in mind that internal political situation in Russia will most probably not change dramatically in the next 10 years. For the next 10 years we may have the same president, the same political elite, and the same sort of political mood inside Russia. And that means that even without this crisis, we would have had quite limited capacity of going forward in terms of political union with the European Union, in terms of increasing our level of political cooperation. But when it comes to the economy, the picture is different. You cannot just disrupt the ties that unite the European Union and Russia because of be it Ukrainian crisis or any other crisis. These ties will continue. And the same goes for Georgia relations with Russia. Again, you may have political difficulties, but if business is interested, it will find the way to cooperate as water can find a way in the sand. You may have politicians creating obstacles for trade, creating obstacles for the economy, but they will never be 100% successful. And I'm sure that if we keep working on a level of business-to-business cooperation, if we keep working on projects that could be of mutual interest, even in this difficult situation when we cannot come to terms in high politics, we can do quite some substantial work together, be it between Russia and the European Union, be it between Georgia and the European Union, and be it between Georgia and Russia. So it's not all lost, even if you see very dramatic images on TV, in the news, on the first pages of newspapers, although the situation around Ukraine that we have is a really dramatic one, and we have to find a way to ensure the de-escalation. I hope that we will do that, but don't think that this is the only thing happening in the relations between Russia and the European Union, Russia and Georgia.
Thank you, Sergey. I will add a few words. Thank you for your presentation. Trust me that we will be happy if we have opportunity to discuss economic issue with Russian officials on the economic level without any kind of additional dramatization and politicization. So thank you for your presentation. Now we have about 15-20 minutes for speakers' questions. You can ask each other some questions. Giorgi, maybe I will start.
With your permission, it will be a comment, not exactly a question, and I have to basically agree with almost literally everything that Dr. Utkin said. First of all, we in Georgia, at least those who are aware what DCFTA is, we never viewed it as a panacea. As I said in my presentation, even if we utilize all the opportunities that DCFTA gives us, it will only translate in about 4% GDP growth. Even with the old barriers removed, well, you need to make an effort to cover the road. So if we do everything at our best, this only makes a very modest contribution to the GDP. And once again, I agree that it's much more political statement, the association agreement itself, and it is we are perfectly fine with that. This is a statement that we are moving on our path toward European integration, even though the European Union itself doesn't necessarily consider association agreement and the CFTA as Georgia's process of integration into the European Union. Actually, they don't. And we are fine with that. We think that we are moving into the right direction. It is good for Georgia, it is good for European Union. I believe this is good for Russia. It should be good for Russia to have stable and prosperous neighborhood. It's a win-win situation for everyone. Second, trade, yes. We do not consider the association agreement and the DCFTA as a means to escape from our neighbors or from Russia in particular. Our current government actually has been making many efforts to increase, and they have increased, the trade volume with Russia, which not everyone is happy about, by the way. I would be one who would be extremely happy if there was no potential of using this as a tool in the hands of Russian government, which has a proven track record of using economic and particularly energy card against our partners. So yes, we will continue to trade very closely with Turkey and Azerbaijan and everyone. This just opens new avenues, and not dramatically wide avenues, but just adds to what we already have. And geography, yes, geography has determined our, well, everything that we represent today, but also our economic function. And one thing that we have started building is a Georgia, and that started in the 90s, a Georgia that links the West, the European Union, and not only with the Caspian region. And this is again not an alternative route to the existing Russia route, but an additional complementary one that diversifies Europe's energy supplies and transportation routes. And in the future, I think Georgia's economic function should be not just a transit territory, but I hope the government is thinking of reviving major economic projects that would give Georgia a significant function, a role of a player in this growing trade between the East and West. And unless the world collapses tomorrow, this trade will only be growing, and both Georgia and Russia will have an extremely significant role that will only increase in time.
Thank you.
I don't think there is a need for a particular answer. I would rather ask a question. As you understand that this is more a political statement, and you understand that there is more work to be done. What would be the main priorities you would focus on? I will draw one example. In one of my previous visits to Georgia, I had a chance to talk to representatives of, I believe it's called revenue service, people who work on the customs, and they explained in a very impressive way how they reformed the system of customs controls to make it easier for business to cross these borderlines and the rest. So they sort of modernized this particular part of trade relations, the physical point where the goods cross Georgian borders. But it's not the last thing you have to do for your modernization. What would be the main priorities apart of the association agreements if you would determine the agenda?
Thank you. First of all, I had to add that Georgia had started, as you are aware, a modernization some years ago, and it wasn't always in line with the EU expectations. Many people describe them rightly, I think, Georgian economic model as a neoliberal. And once we started talking with the EU on the GFSIS and everything, I mean, we had to roll back a number of reforms that actually contributed greatly to the economic growth and investments. Well, we think it's a price worth paying, and this also means change in our trade frontiers. And you rightly mentioned that we had established a system of customs that was more or less a good showcase. I know for a fact that in huge contrast with the previous period of the late 90s and early 2000s, we achieved a huge capacity of the customs in Ajara, for instance, in Sardi. I have talked personally to the Turkish drivers. I have worked in Turkey before, and I know how dramatically their life changed when they achieved 18-minute average processing time. So we may have to roll back some extra liberal, extremely liberal economic policies, reintroduce some agencies that we had abolished to meet the criteria and demands of the European Union. I think the main task, if it was up to me, the main task for Georgian economic development would be to somehow balance this tricky thing of remaining attractive as a growing, developing economy to the investors and at the same time to comply with the European criteria. I think it's possible because what we lose in terms of new regulations, we gain in terms of being more accessible to the European markets.
Yeah, actually, democratization is modernization. This process is dynamic. I can say that I'm all modernized, all of the democrats, full stop. Yeah, we always have to more efforts and move forward. So, actually, we had enough discussion about economy. So let's back to security and conflict issues. Peter.
Well, one reflection that I made when I listened to the colleagues here is how absent the discussion is about the issues that I spent a lot of my time on when I was the EU Special Representative, that is the conflict issues. And I think this is very healthy, in fact. I believe this is part of why Georgia has been as successful as it is in the past few years. In fact, I would almost say that 2008 had some kind of cathartic influence in this country. It allowed Georgia to focus on what is feasible and not just on what is desirable. And that created a direction for the path forward. It created a kind of predictability also for Georgia's partners, and that includes Georgia's partners in the European Union, but it also includes business partners, investors, who, as a result of this new focus of policy, saw Georgia as a much more attractive place to be. Georgia has, as a result of that, been able to implement an impressive reform program, an impressive modernization program that have strengthened the institutions and created a law-based society, has reduced corruption in a way that, for example, we have not seen in a country like Ukraine. I would say that a large part of the reason why Ukraine is in crisis is that Ukraine has, over the course of the last more than 20 years, consistently failed to do this. We saw an extremely unpopular, weak, corrupt government virtually implode, and a new reformist government taking over under very adverse circumstances. The institutions in Ukraine are, as a result of this consistent failure to reform, extremely weak, and that has made Ukraine vulnerable. The issue of identity has also played a role, and it's clear, it's not only because we are in Europass here, but it's clear that the European identity and the European vocation of this country is very strong. It may have be a coincidence and may be a result of geography. It's not Asia, it doesn't look like Asia, it's not Russia. The European part of the identity of Georgia have very much been the guiding force behind a lot of the changes that have taken place. To some extent also, but from a different geographical vantage point, we've seen the same in Moldova. Moldova is much closer to bordering actually on the European Union, but a lot of the same things also was true for that country.
Can I just comment a little bit? You mentioned Ukraine, and I think it's worth putting this in context. Yes, I agree, Ukraine has wasted a lot of time without not only modernizing, but addressing really pressing issues of the institutional corruption and many other things that actually are really underlying problems to the situation that we are seeing today. Even with the Russian attempts, Ukraine would have been in a much stronger position should they have prepared themselves during the course of these 20 years. And I would like to just remind you that in 1990, Ukraine and Poland had identical GDP. And when we say that, association agreement is not anesthesia, free trade, it's not, I agree. But Poland started this way, and Poland never looked back, and 20-something years after, Poland is a country transformed. And Georgia, we in Georgia hope to catch up with countries like Poland, and if they can, we could do that.
Absolutely, I agree. And once again, to express that association agreement and DCFTA, yeah, I agree, it's not a panacea. It's just the opportunity to reduce ourselves to a country and just to move forward. So, thank you for beautiful presentations and your comments. And now I'd like open question and answer session. Please introduce yourself. Maybe we will take 2 or 3 questions. Afterwards, we have 3 more, and so on and so on. Please.
Thank you. My name is Badridze. I represent Georgian Institute for Strategic Studies. I will have more a comment than a question, if I may. First of all, I would like to agree with Mr. Badridze's points when he mentioned that this agreement, association agreement, as well as DCFTA, has, let's say, more political meaning in it rather than economical. But I think there is nothing wrong with it, and this is good because I think this will further strengthen institutional links with the EU, which will contribute and which will make it, which will contribute to the sustainability of Georgia's democratization and modernization. And I personally believe that Europeanization and approximation with the EU is the only choice that will make Georgia a better country. But in addition to this, I would like to make some comments about the presentation presented by guests from Russia, because I might disagree with some points which was mentioned regarding the economic benefits of this agreement. Since I know this agreement very well and I'm aware of all those aspects which are concentrated there, I will allow myself to say this, and I'm saying this not based on my information, but based on official studies that were conducted by Ecoris, by FACE, and this is the official numbers that are used in all reports. And I think, as Mr. Badridze mentioned, the Georgian GDP will grow by 4.98%, which I think is a very good result for a small country like Georgia. And you also mentioned export. You had your presentation 14% export with the EU, and I have to say that after this, after the DCFTA will come into force, import will increase by 7% and export will increase by 12%, and the employment also will increase by 12%. And I think for a small country like Georgia, this is a really tangible benefit. And also, I want to mention that the DCFTA is not only about export and import. It deals with the procurement, it deals with the competition, it deals with the food safety, the regulations in energy sector. So we have to look at it with a more holistic view, because it doesn't deal just with export and import. Yes, we have a trade with other countries, but after the DCFTA comes to power, Georgian companies, Georgian business will have wider network, and within the DCFTA, Georgian market will have access to pan-European Mediterranean area, which will further widen their activities. And you mentioned also GATT and World Trade Organization and this preferred, just sorry, one last comment, preferred nation status, but yes, we had GSP Plus with the EU, which allowed the Georgian business export some products, but the difference between GSP Plus and DCFTA is that GSP Plus doesn't consider all goods, especially food and all those products that Georgia is exporting. So after DCFTA, we have this potential as well. So I just want to make a point that this will have tangible economic benefits as well. So,
thank you. More questions or comments? Yes, please.
Good day to everybody. I just wonder, as I know from this last data, for example, like Georgia exported like $40 million wine, and from this half of it was in Russia. And my question is, why don't ever open the market as much as Russia is opening for Georgia, so we would have same good results like Belarus or other countries you mentioned, like Croatia or other countries, for example?
Thank you. More question? Нет, тут как осталось.
Я წმინდა მიმართო რასაკურებია ჩვენთან მიმართულებს. შთაბეჭდილება ისეთი რჩება, თითქოს საინტერესო შესანიშნავად ლაპარაკობთ, ძალიან სწორად ყველაფერი და გარეთ რომ დახვალ აბსოლუტურად სუსტა სურათია. ჩვენი უცხოური სტუმრები ასევე ისინი ჩამოდიან თავის ქვეყნისიდან, ამ ორგანიზაციიდან, ორგანიზაციაში მუშაობენ და იმ პოზიციიდან გამოდიან სიტყვაზე, რაც მისი სამსახურებრივი მოვალეობა თავობს. ერესეთი აქ იყო ნათქვამი უკრაინა რუსეთის ურთიერთობა, ესეთი ურთიერთობა არ არსებობს. განსაკუთრებით დღეს. ეს არის მსოფლიოს და რუსეთის შორის ურთიერთობა, ანუ რაღაცა ზღვარი, ამიტომ დაწყებული მესამე მსოფლიო ომი, ალბათ ეს უნდა განიხილოს. განსაკუთრებით რაც ეხება თუ უკრაინაზე საუბარი, აქ ისეთ სიტუაციაა, ისეთ შთაბეჭდილება მჩება თითქოს ევროპამ არ იცის საერთოდ რას ნიშნავს რუსული პოლიტიკა, რას ნიშნავს რუსეთი, რას ნიშნავს ეს ველიკოდержавный წარმომადგენლობა მაგათ საერთოდ. ამისათვის ადრესს იყო აქ შეხვედრა ესეთი ელჩები იყო მოსული ლიტვის, საფრანგეთიდან და ჰოლანდიიდან თუ ასე იმისათვის რომ ასოცირებული ხელშეკრულებისთვის ელჩები დაინიშნა. მაშინაც იგივე იმარა შესანიშნავად ვიცით რომ ერთადერთი თითითიც არ დააკარა, როდესაც აქ წითელი ჯარი შემოვიდა და 80 წელიწადი გუგონებდა წითელი ბოლშევიკის შექმნა, ხო? სანამ 20% არ დავკარგეთ 2008 წელს აღმოსავლეთ პარტნიორობის მიმართულება საერთოდ უგულოყოფილი იყო და 2009 წელს საერთოდ რაღაც ნაბიჯი გადაიღო, ხო? ამის მერე განსაკუთრებით გერმანიაზე, საფრანგეთზე იმის სინდის იყო, რომ მაპი არ მოეცათ საქართველოსთვის.
და შეკითხვაში მდგომარეობს.
ეხლა, მაგრამ მე იმიტომ დავიწყე ესე, რომ რა ვიცი, ეს არ საერთოდ არ იყო ნათქვამი ესეთი. ეხლა მინდა ვთქვა, რომ რუმინეთი და ბულგარეთი, ეხლა მაინტერესებს თუ იცით თქვენ რის საფუძველზე მიიღეს რუმინეთი და ბულგარეთი ევროკავშირში. და სულ გეკითხებით 4-ს ვიცით. იმიტომ რომ შესანიშნავად გვესმის და ეს ეკონომიკური მხარე, რომელიც რუსეთს უყვარს მოისწავლება და ისე ჩვენს ვასწავლებს, არა უშავს. არაფრით არ გასწავლება რუმინეთის საერთოდ რა დონეზე არის და რა ქვეყანა არის, მე არც კიდეს როგორ შეიძლება იმის არ იმის მიღება პირველ რიგში, მეორე რიგში შესანიშნავად გვახსოვს ის რეკლამა, რომელიც 2008 წლამდე იყო ტელევიზორში, როდესაც გლეხი გამოდის ვენაში ტანტოს საერთაშება და სეკვავნა წარმოდის და ქოლგამოდის ახალგაზრდას მოა ქოლგას ნატო აწევა. რატო არ არის ეს რეკლამა? იმიტომ არ არის, რომ რაღაცა გაჩნდა ხალხში. დაუბრუნებლობა იმაში, რომ რამდენად დაგვიცავს ეს ევროკავშირი. აქ იმაზე კი არა ლაპარაკი ჩვენ ევროკავშირში. აუცილებლად უნდა შევიდეთ. მაგრამ რის ხარჯზე? და ბოლოს სომხეთმა სამსახურებას უარი თქვა. მაგრამ მე მაშინ ვიკითხე, როდესაც თორთიაში იყო და როდესაც მაგალითად წარმომადგენელმა განაცხადა, რომ შვიდში თუ რაში იყო სექტემბერში და რომ სამში ჩავიდა მაგალითად პრეზიდენტ რუსეთში და უარი განაცხადა იმაზე, ხო? საქმე რაში იცი? იმან კი უარი განაცხადა და კი ჩვენ თვალში და ევროპის თვალში და სოფლიოს თვალში შეიძლება მიგარა. მაგრამ თავის ქვეყნისთვის მეც ვერ დამესახელებ იმას, რომ ინვესტიციები, რომელიც შედიოდა სომხეთში, დაიგო იმ ინვესტიციები. საქმე რაში იცი? შეკითხვა იმაშია, რომ სომხეთმა ძალიან სწორად მოიქცა იმაში, თქვენი პოზიცია მაინტერესებს. თავისი ქვეყნისთვის სწორად მოიქცა სომხეთმა.
Okay, so we have just actually one comment and two questions. Who would like to start?
Well, actually, answering the comment of the lady who has just run away, I'd like to say that actually I agree that this is not the whole story. It's not all about exports and imports. But if you conclude a free trade agreement, still trade is an important part. If you speak about the numbers, indeed, you will probably have this effect that you are making a research on. it will not necessarily be precisely the effect that you have calculated, because you cannot calculate the economy, and if we would be able to, if we would have been able to calculate the economy, probably we would avoid all the economic crisis that we actually experienced. So it's too complicated, it's impossible to predict everything, but I do agree that the association agreement is a step in the right direction, and my major point was not that it's sort of useless, but it's not something that makes you sort of forget about everything outside the EU, concentrate completely on the EU, and it is not something that will do your homework for you. When we speak about demonopolization or some specific measures that would improve business environment, these can help, but only if you do this. And you could actually start with it even without the association agreement. Again, the political meaning is there, but if you don't do your homework, no one will do this homework for you. As I heard from the translation part of the last question, that there were questions on how Bulgaria and Romania made part of the EU, and actually you can find inside the European Union a number of cases when you cannot really say that the high standards of the EU are implemented in the practices of some particular member state. So it's in the end of the day up to the member states to do this job, and it's up to the partner countries to do the job as well. And if you think about the conflicts that may arise from the association agreements for Georgian-Russian relations, this was at least hinted, as far as I understood, in the last comment, that Russia sort of made pressure on Armenia, and it can do so in other cases. Again, I think it was mentioned in this discussion that if you are successful, it's very hard to exert an effective pressure on you. If you are not successful, if you are collapsing as an economy, as a country, then there will be some international players that will just use this opportunity. And for Georgia, I think you still keep quite some potential to modernize, not because of the association agreement, but because you are determined to do this, and you should just keep this determination not to lose the growing democratic institutions that you have, not to fall into authoritarianism just because you have some authoritarian countries around you. And if you do your job as you should, then the result will be there.
Thank you. I'll start with the why. I worked in a number of European countries as a diplomat, and I have to say that the greatest problem I always faced in trying to promote Georgian wines were not the authorities of these countries, but actually the Georgian wine makers and the distributors. We have less and less barriers, and we have almost none now. In Europe, and with the DCFTA, we will have even less. The problem is that I think some Georgian winemakers find easier to deal with the Russian distributors that buy bulk and leave them just with some cash, and rather than going into Europe and working on marketing, finding new niches, presenting themselves as a whole new wine story. And Georgia has a great story, Georgia has a huge potential, and I know some extremely successful Georgian winemakers who have found this unique niche, including in the most demanding London market. And these are the elite Georgian wines that sell not at £5 but at 50. We are talking about consistent quality and people that are determined to work and do the business, and they are successful. There are no external problems that prevent Georgian wine from being extremely successful in the European market. We just need to learn working with the European partners. And there was a very difficult question, and if my colleagues will allow me, I will answer it in Georgian. Bატონო თამას, მე მგონია რომ სომხეთთან ჩვენი შედარება არ იქნება სწორი.
არაფერში მე მარტში შევიდარებდი. მე პირო სომხეთთან თავისთვის რა გააკეთა.
სომხეთის ნაბიჯს მე ბოლომდე ვერ გავამტყუებ. დიახ, ეს ნაბიჯი გადადგმული იყო რუსეთის ზეწოლის შედეგად, მაგრამ სომხეთს მე გაკვირვებული ვარ, თითქმის ყველაფერში მიწევს დათანხმება და ჩემს სტუმართან დღეს, მომზადებული ვიყავ სერიოზული კამპანიისთვის, მაგრამ მე უნდა დავეთანხმო, რომ სომხეთს რომ ჰქონოდა ნორმალური ეკონომიკური ურთიერთობები დალაგებული თავის მეზობლებთან. სომხეთი რომ არ ყოფილიყო ისედაც თითქმის 100%-იანად პოლიტიკურად და ეკონომიკურად დამოკიდებული რუსეთზე, სომხეთს ამ ნაბიჯის გადადგმა არ მოუწევდა. არ მგონია რუსეთს დიდი ხელების გრეხვა დაჭერდა, იმიტომ რომ ძალიან ადვილად დამედა სომხეთი უბრალოდ დიდი არჩევანის არ ქონია. ჩვენ გვაქვს და გეთანხმებით ჩემთვის როგორც საქართველოს ინტერესებისთვის მებრძოლი ადამიანისთვის 1990 წლიდან მე ვარ საჯარო სამსახურში. ჩემთვის პირადად როგორც მოქალაქისთვის და საჯარო მოხებისთვის ყოველთვის იყო ტრაგედია, როდესაც ჩვენი მცდელობები მიუხედავად ჩვენი დიდი ძალისხმევისა და ზოგჯერ მსხვერპლისა, ჩვენი პარტნიორები ნატო-დან და ევროპიდან აკეთებენ იმაზე ნაკლებს, რასაც ჩვენ ვლებთ. მაგრამ ეს არის რეალობა, მათ აქვთ თავიანთი ინტერესები, მათ შორის არიან ქვეყნები, რომლებიც არ გაიბუჭებენ საკუთარ სავაჭრო ურთიერთობებს რუსეთთან და ჩვენს გამო ისინი არ დააყენებენ კითხვის ქვეშ საკუთარ კეთილდღეობას. ეს რეალობაა, ეს შეიძლება ჩვენ არ მოგწონდეს, ეს უსამართლოდ შეიძლება მოგეჩვენოს და არის კიდევაც, მაგრამ ეს რეალობა, ეს არ ნიშნავს, რომ ჩვენ უნდა ხელით ჩამოვყაროთ და უბრალოდ დაუნებდეთ რუსეთს. ჩვენ უნდა გავაგრძელოთ ჩვენი ცდილობები, თუნდაც რა ვიცი შევადაროთ თავი აი შაოლინის მონასტერში რომ მიდიოდნენ და ზოგჯერ თვეების განმავლობაში კარგი უნდა მჯდარიყო ის ახალგაზრდა რომ მიიღო. ესე ევროპა როლარგისი იყოს, ასეთი ძნელი არ იქნებოდა
ორგანიზაცია შეუძლია რომ ქართველი ადამიანი ქართული სახელმწიფო დაუგეს არეთთან
მოკეთ იმას რომ ევროპა სასურველი არ იყოს, იქ მოხვედრა იქნებოდა ძალიან ადვილი. ევროპა გამოგვიზამოდა ჩვენ პასპორტებს და გვერდოდა იცოდეთ ეხლა და დავწეროთ
პარტნიორად და არა რაღაც ციმადი მაგოვაროთი კარებზე ვინ სანამ ეს არ იქნება, სანამ პარტნიორობა დავწნობ, არაფერი არ იქნება. მუდამ ესე იქნება. ჩადიოდი მოსკოვში კონიაკი დაატრობდი, გამოიტანდი ერთ ვაგონ რაღაცა ჩაყოლე და იგივე მოხდება ევროპა. თუ პარტნიორად არ ჩავდორო.
ბატონო, გაზრდილი მოსკოვში სხვა კომიტეტებზე აუცილებლად მოგეძოთ სპიკერად, უბრალოდ ფორმატს თავისი მიაქვს. მე შემიძლია ერთი რაღაცა გითხრათ, უბრალოდ და ამის შესაძლებლად ამ თემაზე დისკუსია. საერთოდ სტატუსის როცა ნორვეგიდან ან ნორვეგიიდან ჩავე, ან ნორვეგიდან დაკავე. ნამდვილად არაცნაირი ნორვეგიდან გამოსვლა და რისკებთან არის დაკავშირებული. მეორე გზა არის არაფერი არ გავაკეთოთ და ჩავდოთ კიდეც. თავისთავად ევროპის გესვლა ეს არის ქვეყნის მოდერნიზაციის და ქვეყნის აშენების გზა, რომელიც ძალიან ძნელია, რომელიც იქოს თავის დანაკარგებს. საერთოდ ზოგჯერ ძალიან მტკივნეობს, მაგრამ უბრალოდ მეორე გზა არის არაფრის კეთება. ამიტომ, როდესაც არჩევანი არის არაფრის კეთებასა და ნორვეგიდან გამოსვლა შორის არის სხვებლის ატანაც. კარგით რა. ეხლა
There is predictably a lot of comments here about Russia and about
Russia in this current crisis. Of course, we must both see to the more immediate challenges here, but also to the longer term. In the immediate situation, it is about standing up and defending the basic principles of international law. It's also about supporting those partners that are under pressure. And thirdly, it's about conflict management and I would say also conflict prevention. Because there are other potential conflicts that have not broken out and that I hope will not do so where it's necessary to take preventive measures. But in the longer term, it's of course at the same time important to continue to engage Russia and not give up on Russia and not make sure that those who have a different vision and different view on immediate tactical issues also get their voice heard. In the long term, I'm convinced myself, having worked a lot with Russia, that Russia will ultimately realize that it is to its benefit to live in a rule-based, predictable system with good neighbors, friendly neighbors that are friends, and instead of neighbors that fear Russia. And it may take some time, but it's only through diligent work and combination of firmness on the immediate issues and continued engagement that this will happen.
Thank you, Peter. So, 2 maximum 3 questions. One more question.
Student at the Georgian Institute of Public Affairs. I have a question to Dr. Utkin. I believe you are correct when you speak about the great importance of trade and business relationships. However, do you think that the process that currently developing at the Russian frontiers, including the crisis in Ukraine, the situation in Georgia and the Russian policies towards Moldova, and many other issues, they can generate summarily such amount of security concern in some of the Western countries, including the United States, that this could somehow overshadow part of economic considerations. And do you think that this could result, maybe not today, but eventually in a system of policies in these Western states, including the United States, that could limit, at least partially, the economic opportunities for Russia, and that this could have serious implications years that you have mentioned.
Thank you, David. And last question, please.
Thank you. My name is Giorgi, and thanks for the interesting discussion. My question goes mainly to Giorgi, the Georgian representative. The association agreement and eventually EU membership is not only about market access and economic growth, it's also about shared values and norms, such as democracy, human rights, minority rights, and one can certainly discuss whether it was too early to let in countries such as Romania and Bulgaria into the European Union, given, for instance, the situation of the Roma in those countries. And in the case of Georgia, it took a lot of pain, a lot of effort to pass the new anti-discrimination bill. So it would be really interesting to hear your thoughts on this, whether Georgia is mature for this or how long it will take, in your opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On the present South Caucasus and what kind of opinion they might have. I know there is the theory that these territories or countries, they might see the success of Georgia, they might see that Georgia is getting ever more appealing, and they might reconsider their position towards building a separate state. It's a very long discussion that we might have on this issue, but I will tell you just my impression, an impression of the outsider. I know that there are people who, probably people in this room who deal with this issue for all their lives, and it's probably too far going for me to give any kind of advice for them. But my impression is that the Abkhaz people are determined to build their state in whatever situation they get. If they have prosperous Georgia that travels and works all over the EU and that is incredibly successful economically, they will still want to build a state of their own. In case of South Caucasus, you might have options, but you know that some people think that after Crimea, Russia also might have options. And this is a difficult situation that I'm afraid can get to another deterioration, another open crisis, and it's important to keep in mind, as it was already said, that Georgia has other issues to focus on, and it's important not to fall into another hysteria if there is some not very rational, not very logical step made by, for example, the Russian government in these territories, not to make this an impediment for your own modernization for your work that you have to do on the territory that you actually control. And answering your question about the economic ties that might probably become a victim of security concerns and instability that we have. If you speak precisely about the US, this might happen because the US has just 3% of trade with Russia. I mean, only 3% of Russian trade turnover is with the US. And for the US, Russia as a trade partner is practically absent. There is no significance. And this is why people can play political games, and this is why it can get dangerous. With the EU, it's much more complicated. You have just business people who work with Russia on their level. They don't think much about politics, and they are completely unwilling to lose the profits that they get in vast Russian market. And when you think about how can you deal with Russia, I know that it can be difficult politically, but keep in mind that these 140-something million people that live in Russia, they do not spend all their days watching Russian TV and absorbing Russian propaganda about Ukraine. many of them just don't think much about politics. This could constitute part of the problem, that they are sort of reluctant to get involved in politics, and this produces a number of problems. But in the end, that means that these people do their business. They work in their private companies, they work in city administrations, they try to improve things on the city level, on the regional level. In some regions, in spite of all the problems we have in terms of the vertical of power, as people call it, we have a number of talented managers also in governmental positions who try to keep doing good things for their country. And you can keep dialogue with them if you decide to do so. The thing is that indeed there can be people in the West, at least in some countries of the West, who would say no, this is just not possible to sort of put Ukraine aside and do business in other fields. And this is dangerous because if you take this course, this could eventually lead to an Iranization of Russia. You could end up with a country under sanctions becoming inherently different from the rest of Europe, already not a European country, even on the level of how people live. And this could be much more dangerous because political regimes change. But if you have this ideological layer that you see on the Russian TV, going deeper and deeper into the population, then you might find it very difficult to change the country afterwards, even if one day a political regime changes.
Thank you.
Okay, then I will just jump into your question. I do not see a fundamental problem in terms of values why Georgia, with time, cannot join the European Union as a country that shares all the values of this union. What you mean is, yes, the current manifestation, expression, something that we will probably see on the 17th of May very soon in the street. And again, this is to me rather a problem of communication, because even the Georgian church says very clearly that it supports Georgia's European integration based on those values. As for the current contradictions, I think they first of all arise from ignorance. The government needs to work much harder, but mostly, and also the non-governmental organizations, the society, and the activists, they need to explain very clearly that the church has the right to consider whatever they consider the sin, but European Union is first of all standing for the right of everyone to think what thing is. So basically, those who support the church need to be told that European Union actually is about protection of religious feelings of everyone. And if you decide to remain conservative in your religious or other ideology, European Union gives you that opportunity, and it is just plain lie when someone is told that European Union puts at the condition of you accepting the values that are in conflict with your beliefs. One, European Union doesn't make it obligatory to recognize the single-sex marriage. It's just a lie. So there is no problem with that. And European Union doesn't have a problem with you thinking that homosexuality is a sin. You will be happy with that if you continue to think that is the case. So in the long term, I do not think there will be any problem with incompatibility of Georgian values with those of the European Union. Our values have always essentially been European values, and we are in the process of evolution and rather introduction of the new redaction, addition of the way we read these values with time. So I don't see any problem with time, but we need to work and communicate with these people who think their values are at risk.
Well, I'm impressed that it took almost 2 hours for Abkhazia and South Ossetia to be mentioned in this discussion. This would not have been the case 3 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago when I was working here. But let me just mention a couple of words on these territories and what we tried to do with the previous government and what I believe still is being done. We developed a strategy or helped the previous government to develop various action plans and strategies for these territories. And the EU also in parallel developed its own strategy of non-recognition and engagement, which, as far as I know, is still valid for the EU work regarding Abkhazia and South Ossetia. These two elements are very important, both of them, and one is not really thinkable without the other one. Non-recognition without engagement would really push these territories further away from the rest of Georgia, and engagement without a firm stance on the formal part, on the non-recognition part, would be a slippery slope. Now, it has been not easy to implement this strategy, and in particular the problem that we saw at the time was to what extent the Georgian government would acknowledge and allow the EU to engage in parallel activities in these territories, and to what extent all activities very explicitly should be done through Tbilisi. I don't think the balance really has been found yet. This is an ongoing discussion. But if you accept the assumption that the EU, having been a very powerful agent of change in Georgia and in other countries, that it could also be an agent of change in these countries, or in these territories, it would make sense, and that was the argument that I and a lot of my colleagues made, that the EU could engage in parallel activities, not all of them going through Tbilisi, in order to make sure that these territories took a path of development that would resemble Georgia's as much as possible, against the assumption that that would facilitate further down the line some kind of reconciliation and coming together. Now, without this parallel engagement, there's very little the EU can do because of the neuralgic aspect of the EU doing things through Tbilisi, and the EU's role as an agent of change will, of course, be much reduced if all activities are done through Tbilisi. So this is a problem that I think, although without having talked to Georgian colleagues in detail about this during this visit, I will see a couple of them tomorrow. I think it's an issue that the Georgian government is grappling with and will be with us for some time to come. But it is important, and this is the underlying basis for this policy. It is important to make sure that these territories do not take a path of development that is fundamentally different from that of the rest of Georgia, which would make any kind of reconciliation much more difficult further down the line.
Thank you very much. Actually, I absolutely agree, and this is really a problematic issue because non-recognition, I agree, doesn't mean isolation. Vice versa, Georgian government, we all are interested in the isolation process, and I hope strengthening cooperation with EU members on this issue. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's already 2 hours we discussed, and our discussion now ends, and I'd like to give about 30 minutes to speakers to just comments or
30 minutes.
30 seconds, sorry. If you like.
I would just like to sum it up by saying that Georgia's course towards the integration of the European Union, and particularly this particular one small step, is going to benefit both Georgia, European Union, and hopefully Russia. As for the Caucasus, as I said, I deliberately abstained from engaging because I believe this deserves a separate long discussion. We wouldn't be able just to focus on the issue that brought us here if we venture in that direction. So thank you very much for organizing this event.
Well, I would like to echo Giorgi's comments. It's a great pleasure to be back here and to interact with a public or semi-public forum like this. I'm very encouraged by the fact that the association agreements will now be signed within a few weeks, but I'm also very encouraged by the quality of this discussion and the kind of questions that have been asked here. They are very much directed towards the future, reforms, economy, and so on, issues that Georgia need to focus on from now. You have really the priorities and the vision absolutely right as far as I've been able to determine from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Probably just one thing to add. Speaking of the Russian official attitude on the association agreements, you may see today that at least some statements say that the attitude is determined by ideology, that the association agreement is seen as sort of joining the club which is not ours. And this is sort of the determining factor for the Russian policies. And I very much hope that at some point, probably later rather than sooner, but still, at some point, there will be enough rational people in the Russian government just to understand that this whole story is not about ideology, it's about creating a common space that should be beneficial for everyone. And if we actually have any technical difficulties that make it problematic for Russia to cooperate with countries that accept EU laws and regulations, then it is actually a very difficult practical problem for Russia. It means that Russia should change something in its legislation to make it possible to cooperate with the EU, because the EU and countries that accept the EU regulations will still be the major economic heavyweight in this part of the world. So we have quite some common interests in this sense, and I hope that one day we will be able to work together to make this evident not only for experts but also for practical politicians. And I would like to thank the audience for their interest.
Thank you. Let me thank our speaker for a really beautiful and interesting presentation and very interesting discussion. I'd like to thank Maya, the House of Europe, and you personally for this beautiful idea